Welcome to Surrender School.
At Surrender School, we recover. Our mission is to share 12-step and other supportive recovery solutions with those who want a healthy relationship with food. We are not an official 12-step meeting, but we do try to adhere to the spirit of the traditions. If Surrender School has helped your recovery in any way, please consider donating. We are a nonprofit. Everything and everybody that's involved with this just volunteers their time as a form of service. We have website hosting costs, we have Zoom costs, we have insurance costs, and then we're putting together a retreat for 2026, and we will, of course, have costs to do with that. Okay. So let's take a moment, come into the room, leave the cares of the day behind. You can pick them back up when we're done. Take a couple of deep breaths. Feel your feet on the floor. Get good and grounded and present. Higher power, help us to set aside everything we think we know, to leave space for what we have yet to learn. Okay, so today we are going to talk about identity. And this is an interesting topic, I think. Okay. So, and specifically, I'm going to be talking about identity, the importance of identity for abstinence. So, of course, when we talk about identity, that begs the question, who are you? Who do you want to be? The definition of identity that I like best is identity is our sense of who we are as individuals and as members of social groups. It's how we show up in the world. Now, there is an important thing to understand when we're talking about identity. Identity is how you see yourself, not how others see you, but how you see yourself. It's your internal sense of who you are, what kind of person you are. And I think we complicate our lives when we don't know who we are or what we want. We have to do the work to create a kind of guiding vision for who we truly want to be and what we truly want to create in this world. Now, I think most of us, and I don't know if this is particular for food addicts and compulsive overeaters or not, but I think most of us live in a made-up story of who we are, given to us by other people. We haven't even crafted it ourselves. Toltec philosophy has this incredibly useful concept called domestication. This is how the world tells us who we are. It's a process, the process of domestication. As children, our identities are given to us, first by our parents and siblings, and then later by our friends, school, church, culture, every book we read, every movie we watch, every conversation we have tells us who we are. As children, okay, I'm sorry, I just lost myself. Okay. Now, it's important that we recognize that all this information is coming into us. Okay, we're being domesticated, socialized, right? I mean, we have to be, we have to get along in the world. But it's a problem if we don't sift it through our own sense of identity of ourselves. And we tend to do that in our teenage years, right? We tend to rebel against who people told us we were. And sometimes we do the work of figuring out who we are and who we want to become. But all of this jumbled up story stuff about ourselves tells us who we should be, what we should think, what we should believe, how we should behave, and what we should and shouldn't do. This is how we are given identities from others. And all our innate natural identity tendencies are lost in the process of domestication. And I think compulsive overeaters and food addicts suffer this more than others in that we tend to be really good people pleasers. And it's really easy to lose yourself when you're busy making other people happy, and sometimes making other people happy at your own expense. So people tell us who we are, and we believe them. We never think to question these pronouncements about ourselves. We accept them and then live our lives like they're true, telling ourselves stories about ourselves based on what we've been told about ourselves. Now, I was told in a lot of different ways that I was fat, stupid, ugly, weak, and lazy. Not very positive, but I believed it. And I believed it for most of my life because I never even thought to question those pronouncements. I lived my entire life like those pronouncements were true, and my belief in them dictated my behavior. And that's important for us in program and in abstinence. And we'll talk about that in a second. Steve Chandler, in his book, Reinventing Yourself, says we either see ourselves as the owner of our human spirit or as a victim of circumstances. He goes on to say, just as your muscles shrink when they are not moving, so do your heart and soul when you are in victim mode. And I will tell you that I was given an identity of a victim, and my food addiction only compounded that identity of myself. I was victimized by the food. I was victimized by this party. I was victimized by this person making something to eat, making me something to eat. I was victimized by my culture because I didn't fit the normal way that teenagers looked in the 80s. Okay. You are either an active participant in life, someone who engages with life, believing in your abilities to navigate life, or you're a victim. And a victim is a very passive stance on life. Life just kind of happens to you. And as a result, you believe you are helpless in it. Chandler also tells us the sad tragedy is that the same energy that could be going into problem solving and identity development is used by the victim for problem avoidance. And for us, that means eating. That's our major way of problem avoidance, is eating. And I don't know about you, but I spent a lot of energy on my addiction, a lot of time, effort, energy, and money. Okay. All right, Linda. Okay, so we get it, but what do we do about it? Your beliefs are important to your identity. What you believe is true about you is very important for how you see yourself. I had to start loosening the grip of who people told me I was because I had to recognize that the identity people gave me was just their opinion, not the truth. And you know what they say about opinions, that they're like belly buttons. Everyone has one. everyone. So I think in truth, the identities and labels that people gave me said more about them than it did about me. And not to get too psychobabbly, but often people project characteristics they don't like about themselves onto other people in their life. Now, I believe after a crap load of work in program and a crap load of therapy, that the identity characteristics I was given as a child were projections of things my parents didn't like about themselves. So I started to list characteristics of who I wanted to be, how I wanted to show up in recovery. Here's a question for you. What does it really mean to be a person in recovery? What does that even look like? Then I translated these characteristics that I wanted to have into behaviors. And James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, says that your beliefs are important for your identity, but your behaviors are even more important for how you see yourself. He tells us the more you repeat a behavior, the more you reinforce the identity associated with that behavior. And he advises us to let our identities drive our behavior. Okay, so here's a couple more questions. What behaviors do you engage in when you are at your best? When you have a fabulous day, what are those behaviors? What behaviors make it really hard for you to overeat and binge? What daily behaviors that you do make it really hard for you to overeat and binge? Because they don't fit with who you are. Okay. So how do we put all of this in motion? Okay, so we're talking about thinking about these characteristics of who we want to be, how we want to show up in recovery, how we want to show up in the world, how we want to show up in relationships. We've got all these characteristics, and so then we look at them and we start thinking, okay, how would someone with those characteristics behave? So we translate those characteristics into some behaviors. Okay. So now what? Do you remember who William James is? Bill W. quotes him in Appendix 2 in the Big Book about spiritual experiences of the educational variety. Bill got this information from one of William James's books called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Now, Dr. James was a prominent psychologist who influenced Bill very heavily, and really probably the early AAers coming out of the Oxford group. Okay. Dr. James is where the early AAers got the slogan, act as if. Dr. James was the one who developed the as if principle. He's the one that came up with it in a different book, but he's the one that came up with that principle. And he said, if you want a quality, act as if you already have it. You practice the quality until it becomes second nature. Now, believe it or not, there has been quite a bit of actual modern scientific research on the as if principle. It's actually been researched quite a bit. Richard Wiseman wrote a book called The As If Principle that looks at the modern research findings around the as if principle. And it's pretty powerful. They are very robust, positive research findings around the as if principle. So it's not just something, an old timer throws out at a meeting. It actually is something that works if you do it. Now, it's not like everything else in program. I wish there was one thing in program I could say worked this way for me, but it's not a switch that you flip. It's obviously something that you have to have intentional and deliberate practice around, practicing these new behaviors that reinforce this recovery identity that you have. You know, we start to tell ourselves, I behave this way because it's who I am. And I believe we can have an abstinent identity. I do these behaviors because I am abstinent, and I am abstinent because it is who I am. And that is the way that I think identity really can powerfully impact our abstinence. I believe this identity exploration is part and parcel of our hero's journey into recovery that I've been talking about. We will be asking ourselves to behave very differently than we typically do. And that can be scary at times. I'll be the first one to admit that. But remember, being afraid to do something is not the same as being unable to do something. I'm going to say that again. Being afraid to do something is not the same as being unable to do something. Okay, I've got a question. I'll put it up here. Okay. Before I tell you the question, I have to explain the picture here. This was in my wife's med pages that she gets still. She's retired, but she still gets all the medical stuff. And it's this picture at a conference of two guys talking about obesity. And they made the little pie chart that people, pick foods and eat to ease anxiety 99% of the time. They're only concerned about actually getting nutrients or nutrition like 1% of the time. And I thought, oh yeah, that's us. So here's our journaling question. Who do you want to be in recovery? What characteristics, attitudes, and behaviors do you want to have? Do you want to display? So that's our question. I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes, and I will see you on the other side.
Thanks for recovering with us.